Hello and welcome to the latest episode of the White Pew podcast. My name is Gabrielle de la Puente
And I'm Serena Mohammed.
and we're going to do something a little bit different today. Basically, me and Serena are losing our minds in the in the midst of writing a book. We don't necessarily find it easy to say things at the moment because we're just so focused on writing, but we feel a lovely obligation to provide more interesting content to our art interested audience. So what we've done today is invite an interesting person that we know and they're going to entertain everyone on our behalf. We are joined today by Buckenham, who is an artist slash many different things, and I think that many different things end of the sentence is going to be the subject of today's podcast. Hello, V. How are
Hello.
you doing?
I like how little pressure you've introduced me with like, yes, this person is going to single-handedly entertain us. Like our brains have liquefied.
You made it sound like we're losing our minds, and we are.
We are. Yeah, we're going to chat to V today and ask some interesting questions about what art they make, but also what is a creative technologist and some projects that are about to be launched that are exciting and that I think a lot of our audience will love, to be honest.
You got to humour me for this first question because I think Gab alluded to that artist and many other things. You are polymath, right?
Sure,
things.
sure. Yeah,
So-
yeah, go on then.
I'm saying it. Yes, polymath. So the first question is, hello, imagine I'm an alien or a child. Please describe your practice to me in a way that I would understand and enjoy.
Uh so I always think like what you put as your like bio is kind of interesting for this. So my bio on Mastodon is I make things that make other things. Uh so I guess that seems about right. Like, so I guess the two main like strands are either making a computer program that then makes the art, if that makes sense, or making a tool that other people can then use to make the art. So it's always like a little bit one step removed.
What did you study at university to like lead you into making things in the first place? Because I've got like a question I don't quite know how to word, which is how do you do all of the things that you do, like practically speaking? How do you know so many things?
So the degree was cognitive science, which is like kind of a weird one in itself. So like at the university I went to, it was basically like a joint degree between psychology, like computer science. You could also do linguistics and philosophy in there. I did a bit of linguistics and then was really bad at it, so I dropped it. So I guess I came out like having studied psychology and having thought about a bunch of stuff from that and having done a load of like AI related work and just general kind of computer science stuff. So it was a real kind of grab bag of stuff, but I guess it came out of it with that, some ability to program and some kind of familiarity and friends who were kind of in that scene. And then also, I guess, just a lot of thinking about human behavior and how to like make systems and how to like think about it from that side of it. But I think I actually got better like in my practice after I'd left and after I was like working in games and making my own projects there and just kind of putting stuff together there. A thing I really like about making games, especially in kind of small teams, is it's just like there's just too many different things you need to be able to do. Like it's like to make a game is like, oh yeah, you need to do the sounds and you need to do the visuals and you need to do the programming and you need to test it with people and you need to think about how you're going to market it and you need to think about just like all of these things, and every game is different, so it throws up like random problems. So I think it's like kind of you do that for a while and then you just suddenly you start developing that like, oh yeah, I can do that. Like I've not done it before, but probably I can do that well enough well enough to get this thing done. Then I guess like a load of the projects still kind of come from that same mindset. It's like, oh yeah, the thing you're making doesn't have a win condition.
And what games have you worked on?
So I've worked on one that you've definitely heard of, Mutazione, which I worked on for a few years. which I think you reviewed, right?
I reviewed in 2020. Yeah.
Yeah, yeah. I left that project a few years before it was out, so a load of the stuff with the story and stuff I can't really take any credit for. But there were good colors, and I can take responsibility for the way those colors change. So definitely claiming that. So yeah, I worked on that. I worked on a game for a promotional game for Azalea Banks, where she's a mermaid
What?
swimming underwater. That was the first studio I was at. Uh,
Wow.
Oh my
Wow.
god.
like didn't get to meet her, but like we sent it over to her for like feedback and approval. And the one comment we got was, "Can you make my butt bigger?"
Amazing.
Yes. That's sometimes what you want from an anecdote, like you know what you want from like someone else's anecdote, and that was just like exactly 100% what I was after. Yeah.
Those are all someone else's like ideas that you are working to fulfill. When did you start to like veer off and make art or games or whatever
Mm.
we're gonna call them that were totally coming from you and made by you and fulfilled by you?
Yeah, so it was kind of always kind of alongside. I was always making stuff, and I guess there's like a bit of a divergence where it started off as I was making games alongside, and then it was other things that weren't necessarily games or kind of drifted further away from that. But maybe that's not even true, actually. Maybe I was still always working on stuff that was kind of weird alongside. I just didn't like think of it as a practice, more just a like, oh, wouldn't it be interesting if I made this thing, if that makes sense.
That does make sense. But what was the first thing that you made that you were like that felt like, oh my god, okay, I feel like I am an artist. Like this is now undeniable. I actually
Can't
should
hide it
probably lean
anymore.
Mm, mm. Maybe other people relate to this actually. Like it definitely for me, it was like I had been paid a reasonable amount of money to give an artist talk, and I still felt insecure about calling myself an artist. Like, so I think like the point at which I was definitely an artist was like earlier than the point at which I was just like, yeah, no, I'm an artist. Like this is an identity I feel comfortable kind of claiming and having, if that makes sense.
But why was there any discomfort
in. Yeah.
there?
I think it's just I don't know. Like there's it's the here is this community of people that I don't feel part of, I guess. I was part of like, yeah, game developers who like there are artists, but those are like, oh, the people who do like 2D, 3D artists, that's what that word means in that community. And then I was involved in a load of stuff with like Twitter bots and making Twitter bots and making tools for other people to make Twitter bots. And with a load of people there who are like very clearly digital artists and like reasonably accomplished ones. But at the same time, like people there were bot makers rather than artists. I guess it was kind of looking at this stuff and like the stuff I was making and kind of going, oh, actually, no, like I guess this is art. I guess this is art that could be legible in like this kind of artistic community. I guess I'm gonna like actually call myself that and try to exist within this new community.
I think what you're picking up on is like, dependent on the context, the identity of an artist means different things. And when you're speaking to me and you're telling me all of these like cool things that you do that seem like, why would a human spend their time doing these things? It's just for fun and because it does something that makes you go, oh, that was cool, or oh my god, how did you do that, or that looks good. I think, well, obviously that person is an artist, but it's like that moment in House that I always think about where if a patient presents with issues and a cardiologist is the first person to see them, the cardiologist is going to think it's something to do with the heart. And if it's a neurologist, they're going to think it's something to do with the nervous system. Like, I think seeing this through an art critic lens, I have to be aware that I've never worked in the game industry, and an artist is listed in the credits of a game. They're normally the person who did like just the technical like production of the artwork in the thing. It's not even necessarily that they came up with the concept design, because that might be another job on top of that and they're just following someone else's instructions. And then it makes me think, like, is an artist someone who comes up with everything from beginning to end on their own, or can you be like an artist to hire, which also exists, but like I don't think the art world talks about that a lot. And actually something that me and Zarina have been thinking about recently is like how do you make it work as an artist? And do people, for example, art students, are they told about all of the different avenues that they might be able to follow in order to, one, make work, but also make money at the same time? Because taking that game design route as an artist could actually be quite healthy to an
Way more
extent.
lucrative potentially. Yeah.
Oh, I keep thinking about talking to someone who worked for Ian Cheng. Do you know Ian Cheng's work? Is
Yeah.
like weird. But yeah, basically he was describing like the setup of that. And I was like, oh, this is an indie game studio. It's like 5 of you, you're working with Unity. Like it sounds like the kind of production pipeline and process is exactly that of like a, reasonably small scale indie game studio. But like the thing you're producing is artwork and the studio is called Ian Cheng.
Exactly. There's almost like a sanctity or a weird stricture of art production where, like, if someone else is telling you what you should make, then it doesn't really count as
Mm.
art, because or even if there's a fee at the end of it and they're telling you to make something very specific, like, the aura is kind of lost because it becomes like capitalist production, less so like someone who's had an idea of their own accord, and that's just so weird. But also,
It's
yeah,
like
I sort of get
it's
it.
like the kind of weird, icky feeling around like capitalist production, but I think also like tied to it is the idea of like the art world loves a singular genius. Like the art world loves a prodigy, a virtuoso, like someone who is so gifted and talented that money just simply, they exist in a currencyless state where like they are able to transcend the dirty, grubby realities of like actual banal existence, and they just kind of sit there churning out these deliciously abstract conceptual ideas. And like I think what you're identifying with that resistance of like, because as I say, I have effectively stalked you, like really gone through your website, and like even the stuff that you were making kind of on the side, like Punch the Custard
Mm.
and that game where it's like you're a frog on a trampoline and you're bouncing up and down,
Sure, yeah.
and like the like the graphics are bouncing up and down as well. Like I think there's something about like John Raifman would pay really good money to like come up with an idea like that, like the trampoline, like just that as like a way of experiencing a moving image work. Um, that and like Hell is Other People, like the idea that you would fight the shadow of the last player.
Yeah. So
Um,
Hell is Other People is that game that I made just when I was coming out of university. So that was like the first thing I made.
Tell the audience about it, because
Oh
they're
yeah,
not
yeah,
gonna know
yeah.
what Punch the Custard is. They're not gonna know what Hell is
yes,
Other
no, we
People
should run through
is.
these.
Yeah. So Hell is Other People is it's like one of those kind of basic like 2D. You're a little spaceship and you're firing weapons and you can pick up a thing and then you fire a different weapon. Except all of the enemies you're fighting are people who have previously played the game, but just like flipped. So they're shooting in the other direction. So you start out and they all have the beginning weapon and they're kind of shooting and they're dodging. So you're like dodging as well, but this means you're like shooting slightly offset to shoot where they would dodge to, because that's just the kind of pattern. And then you start going and you're like, oh no, I can hide at the side. And then they pick up the thing that fires sideways and you're like, ah, damn, now I have to dodge this. So yeah, like increasing numbers of them, increasing kind of difficulties there, but it's still this kind of, yeah, I guess I've not thought about it. Like it's also this kind of video game that's made by the people who are playing it. So it is kind of that kind of creative tool
It
at
is
the
a
same
tool.
time.
Yeah,
Yeah.
I see that. And then what's Punch the Custard?
So Punch the Custard is, I was kind of, I guess, like, kind of involved in this kind of community who was making, I don't know what the right word is, like, I think of it as like running around games, like games that are like folk games or that you play. There used to be this like festival at the South Bank Centre, hide and seek, sandpit, like weekenders, and they did one kind of every month over the summer. So yeah, loads of people were making stuff there, and some of it had a little bit of electronics in, some of it had different stuff. It was a really kind of cool community and really kind of cool scene that existed there. So yeah, I was like, oh, I want to take part in this, and I emailed my now friend Holly with like, oh hey, I've got these like 2 ideas. One of them was like some terrible thing about running around quoting Shakespeare, and then the other one was like, what if you had this game where you're punching a bowl of custard like corn flour and water, competitively against someone else, and you've got to punch it as fast as you can. And also the computer knows how many times you've punched it, so it like beeps and like increments a little number. And she's like, no, yeah, definitely that one. That one's definitely good.
What was people's reaction to it?
Pretty great. Yeah. Like I ended up running it like at a ton of places. I ended up like yeah, it like actually toured. It went to like LA, Margate, Singapore. I feel I have to list Margate
What
because
the
it was
fuck?
LA,
yeah.
Singapore, Margate.
No, I have to list Margate because I went to Singapore because they showed it at Margate, and Kate Neal, who was running it down at Margate, then got in touch and was like, "Oh yeah, we're doing this thing out at like the Art Science Center out in Singapore. Do you want to come out to Singapore for a week, like run this for half the time, and then just like see Singapore for the rest of the time?" And I'm like, "Yes, I could definitely do that."
Okay, right. So this is what I'm trying to get at. Of all the things that we could do as humans in the world, like, why was that so successful? Like, I don't mean that in a way I don't believe it could be, but like anthropologically, as someone who has studied human psychology, what do you think that says about us and you as well?
Like, I mean, fundamentally, it's just nice to do a strange thing. It's nice to like feel a weird substance. Like it's entirely piggybacking off like, ah, there's this fun substance that's fun to play with, and then you're doing something kind of silly. And the because like it goes for a minute, and a minute is like a really long time to be doing this kind of like do something as fast as you can kind of activity. So you start out and you're like, oh yeah, I can do this, and then you get halfway through and you're like, oh god, can I do this? And I'm going against someone else, so I'm like competing really hard. Yeah, so you're like suddenly in this like yeah, real like competitive frantic space, touching something strange. You just people like to be in a new weird situation, you know?
Yeah. Well, that's what makes it art. Like, people, every time someone goes into a gallery, they love to be in a weird situation. I think the weirder the art, the better. In terms of inserting like weird little moments into our daily life,
Mm.
you were mentioning before about Twitter bots.
Mm.
For anyone who maybe doesn't know what they are, could you just explain?
Sure, yeah. I mean, they're just, I guess, Twitter accounts that you can follow, interact with like a normal Twitter account, except instead of there being like a person who posts the tweets, it's a machine. It's a computer program running on some computer somewhere that posts the tweets. Usually on like a schedule or like responding to stuff. So the stuff that I'm like, I guess, most interested in there is like stuff that's like relatively simple, but becomes powerful because it's in this space that you wouldn't, I was gonna say you wouldn't expect, but I've been like deep within the Twitter bot world for years, so now I totally expect them to be there. But it like is existing on the same level as people exist in this space, but it's like weird art that does operate by these different rules, and also like produces things that are like surprising or delightful or interesting to see all the different variations of like over time, like
Yeah.
an artwork that you don't like go into and you're like, cool, I'm like immersed in this and I'm giving it my full attention. Instead it's like, I'm like glancing at this as I'm scrolling through and doing other things.
Yeah.
That's super fascinating to me.
It totally like just inserts itself into normality in a way that I've always really liked. I know Zarina's probably dying to speak because Zarina is the first person I ever knew who made a bot. But V, can you just like tell us some of your top highlights out of the bots that you have made?
Oh, I guess the first one I'd say is soft landscapes, which makes these like like when you see like a mountain mountain range and like there's like fog or clouds, so like the ones at the back are kind of hazier and maybe the colors are beautiful, like this kind of genre of picture. Basically it generates those, and like it's like super simple kind of forms, but like it can get some wild colors in there, so that's pretty good. One I'd also just shout out is like one of the first ones I made, which is basically each of the tweets is like a different step of an instruction. Like I remember being like round at like my grand's house, and like when you arrive there, the conversation, as somebody who doesn't drive, the conversation always starts with like, how did you get here? And like this like long discussion of like the route that you took and whether it was optimal or whether there was a better route. and you ask people like, oh yeah, you like mention you're going somewhere, and then they're like, oh yeah, you should go this way and take this route and stuff like that. And for me, it's kind of like, it's fine. I'm just going to look at Google Maps. I'm not even really listening to the thing you're saying, but it's impossible to shut you up. You need to get this out. So it's like, okay, yeah, this is fine. But it just like generates that as like a series of tweets. I made this platform that you can make Twitter bots with called Cheat Bots Done Quick. And then recently I made one that just tweets out lines from the lyrics of Dry Cleaning, you know, the band. On the basis that like actually I think the thing that Cheatbots is mainly used for is like this kind of like tweeting out lyrics or like quotes from characters that people love. And I was like, oh, I want to do this. And then doing it was actually really nice, just to be like, here's a band I really love who has lyrics that I really like, and just like looking through their entire set of lyrics to like chop them up into tweet-sized quotes and like think about what's good to do there was like this really nice, like engaging with their work.
I love that. They're my favorite ones as well. I love ones that are more like image based, like many gradients, soft landscapes, Unicode garden as well. And like people, yeah, when loads of little emojis pop out, the ones that look like deserts, things like that.
The desert one's my favorite.
So good.
Because sometimes you get a little snake.
But I think like, yeah, maybe even more than that, the ones that sort of start to like eat themselves a bit fascinate me, because as you say, they start to come out with things that you just weren't expecting them to, which is great, which is why Zarina's one is also so funny to me.
For context, listeners and V, my bot, I made her, I've personified her. She's her own separate like sentient entity in my mind, because she's been running for like, I think 8 years. But she is a non sequitur Twitter bot, I think is the thing. I fully pinched the code from someone. I didn't write it all myself. But she just takes the content of my tweets and my retweets, and she kind of like turns them into like a jumbly soup. Like she does like the snipping herself, like the back end on like Heroku or wherever it takes place. Like the Python code does that. And, like,
yeah, another snake.
That one, I hand it over to the snake, and like it kind of garbles it up and then spits out kind of this weird Dada surrealist poetry from like my own words, but like I think it the fascination I had with it at the time, because I haven't heard from her in a while. I don't know why, but Elon's new algorithm just means that I just don't see her on timeline. But like at the time when I made her, the fascination that I had was very much what you described, that like small punctuation, like the delight, right, of like the staccato delight of like her popping up on my timeline when I wasn't expecting her,
like your alter ego.
Yeah, but I think you used the word delightful, like something that would be like that feels like the right word for the way that those bots function, because there is like a little pleasure in it, like it's just nice. It just is nice. Like it's not like nice on like a grand spectacular scale. It's like a very like a really small human niceness, which I really like. I think like the scale of that, like small, it's the small things that like make up the entire world, right? Like it's like the world doesn't take place at like the scale of like the enormous or like the geopolitical. It's like the small crunchy things. I do have a question about maybe particularly what it is about like why do you want to see more bots in the world? Because Cheat Bots Done Quick is about facilitating other people's access to this as like a technological format, or like affecting other people's ability to actually go out and make this stuff. Why do you want to see more bots in the world?
I've thought about this, like weirdly I only thought about it obviously after I made it and it was up, and like, you know, like when I was making it, it was just like, of course this is like a good thing to do. Then afterwards,
which is also why you're an artist, because artists just do things and then like figure it out later.
Yeah.
But yeah, like I mean, fundamentally it's like, of course I want to see more of this, just because people enjoy making things. People enjoy like creating something and getting that like the creativity of like, oh, I wanted something to, I don't know, post some random thing regularly, like I wanted that to happen, and now I have, and like it's brought kind of delight, and it gives people that kind of creative canvas that like they wouldn't otherwise have, because it's like making a Twitter bot is, I mean, this is the thought I had at the beginning, was just like making a Twitter bot is like fundamentally like an annoying process. Like it runs on a server. Okay, cool. Like so now I have to have a server, and I have to like have something running on a server reliably. Like that's annoying for me to solve, let alone someone who does not have a kind of technical background. And you have to do all of this just to make something that's like,
The Arthur Morgan bot, like all of that work just to tweet like Red Dead quotes. Like,
yeah,
it's a
totally.
lot.
Like it's just not worth doing. There were people in the kind of bot making community who were just kind of like, yeah, you've just kind of got to do this. And like, because it was only those people in the community, people who could do all of that and who felt that was like easy or like manageable, they were like, oh, it's fine. And then I looked at it and I was like, this is annoying and it could be better. And I also like the kind of I guess like making generative work is a kind of interesting thing in itself for me. Like making a generative work is interesting because you're not making a thing. Like the output is not the thing you're making like the probability of various things being in that output. Like the thing you said, Serena, about the deserts and how sometimes there's a snake. Like the decision to have a snake there, like very rarely is like an interesting creative decision to me, but it's like an interesting thing because it's like if you look at any one of those outputs, that decision doesn't come through. You only see the decision in like repeatedly engaging with it and then noticing, oh, there's a snake and that's rare. Like, so
Mm.
like crafting that is a kind of interesting thing to me. And like, there's not many ways that people get to play with that kind of thing, except Twitter bots do give that kind of joy. So
Yeah,
yeah,
it's
yeah.
like I don't want to be this person because I went to like a talk by Ed Atkins at the Contemporary Art Society years and years ago where he was like, we should not be speaking about technology as if it's some kind of magic. Like we shouldn't be speaking about the internet like it's, you know, or the cloud as if there are these like impossible magical things that we don't have any control over because who knows what they are. And like I feel like I have been that person for so long, but when I see Twitter bots, I think, oh, it's like a parlor trick. It's like a little magic trick, and how amazing that like V the wizard is the person who's like teaching everyone how to do the magic behind the scenes by providing a tool in order to be able to do it. I feel like the same confusing mystique when you talk about generative art because it does have that like wonder attached to it, like, oh my god, because you have set something up, you don't know what art is going to come out of it, but that's almost like not the point. It's the setting it up and making those creative decisions that is where you're happy to leave it at. Um, what have you made in terms of generative art that you would be interested in telling the audience about? Because I can
Mm.
see if for the people who watch the video version that you've got something behind you that is like a giveaway.
And
uh,
I want to know how to say this out loud.
So V's website, if anyone wants to go and have a look, is v21.io, and on the side there is a list of artworks, and two of them are not language in any recognizable sense, but they're
Not
called
even
something
like,
else.
you know, with emojis, you can just say the emoji and you can
yeah.
like. So I'm
This
used to
is
like
block, block, block,
translating
block.
pictographs into words now because of the emoji summaries. But with this, I don't even know. Like it's like shaded square,
I
shaded
think
square.
so Gab, when you edit this, can you just like replace the thing I'm about to say with like just like a bunch of static? So
Yes.
yeah, I think I'd say it as
Perfect. Okay.
like the stuff that they were making was like so garbled that it didn't didn't feel right to give them a name that would otherwise work. I don't know.
When you click on the page that is like, what happens?
A pattern forms, and then the pattern kind of, I guess, kind of continues eating itself and continues changing. I don't know. Yeah, like I'm like trying to describe it on one level, and I'm like, there's two levels I can describe it on. One is the kind of just like aesthetic of like it eats itself, and there's kind of patterns that feed back on each other and kind of develop, and you can kind of see like a crease that then kind of extends itself out or becomes a line, and there's kind of these patterns that are forming by themselves. Um, and then I guess the like more technical level is that as it runs, each of the like pixels on the screen is like fed into an input, and so each of the pixels depends on like all of the pixels around it, which it like adds up. It basically adds up the values in all of those pixels, with random kind of weighting, and then that produces a pattern. So it starts with, here is like a particular pattern, and then we add this, just keep on layering on this kind of like adding stuff up. And the
Oh, that's
technical
so
term for that is
nice.
convolution.
I was about to say that sounds like really friendly maths, like
Yeah,
really interpersonal maths, like the pixels and mates and they're just
you might also hear a bunch of this from like AI stuff, because a bunch of the AI algorithms are about like creating these like set of weightings that the convolution works on. Like that's how a lot of this kind of AI stuff works, is like training to find that. But instead of doing it like with AI and training very cleverly to find these weights, instead it's just like, what if we have some random weights? So there's a little bit of like aesthetic similarity there between like this and I guess the kind of like those kind of early Deep Dream things where it like kept making dogs and it kept like just adding crinkly detail into stuff. It's actually the same algorithm that like Photoshop uses when you say, oh yeah, do a blur or
Hmm.
sharpen. It's that same kind of like, oh yeah, take the edges and like highlight those. So it's like, what if you just like keep taking the edges and highlighting them and then doing that repeatedly until it just becomes this like grainy grainy mess.
And you've done it with color as well in the
Mm,
RGB piece, which is sort of
yeah, yeah,
similar.
yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. So then I kind of came back to it and I was like, what if I did this with color? And then I kind of worked on it a bit more and ended up like, instead of sampling necessarily the next pixel, it can like sample pixels like further away, because all of these like convolution ones always have this kind of, you don't have like kind of large forms, you only have this kind of like texture that builds up, or occasionally you have large forms, but it's like very focused on this kind of texture. So I was like, what if you could you have it where it's like a larger wash of color? And so I think the RGB one actually does this, all of this pixel stuff, and it does it for like red, green, and blue separately. And then constantly seeding it with like a dot of red, dot of blue, dot of
Hmm.
green.
It's I just want to underline that all of these exist on web pages, like interactively so as well. Like you can click and start to mess with like the pattern of it as it happens.
I have a question that I'm absolutely burning to ask you because I think with and with the other second one with the boxes in there wiggly on two levels, that one, how do you say that
Mhm.
one?
I think that's
Is that one
also.
also okay? So with and second different kind of static and RGB and calming sphere, I think, and maybe epicycles as well. I was I was like having a plink plonk like a tip tap type around last night, and I was sending them to someone, and we were like sending each other like little screenshots of like the things that were popping up, like the little pages, and like just swapping back and forth these like delicious, delightful images. And I think I want to know now if you think of yourself as a painter of sorts. Like, do you feel, because if there's so much about like the way these web pages function that feels painterly, or like painterly in the way that they generate images, like painterly in like a time based way or like a digital way, but fundamentally like painting.
Mm.
Do you
I
want
think
V to think of themselves as a painter?
No. I'm just I think it's something that I would say about you, but I'm a critic. Of course, I'd say that. Like, you know what I mean? I'm a critic that loves paintings. Of course, I'd say that. Like, it's that thing, right? Like,
Yeah, you just submit like RGB to the John Moore's Painting Prize this year. Oh my
I
god, do
beg
it.
you. Oh my God, it'd be a shoo-in. We'd both be there. Like, you should definitely. I want this one to win. Because I bet, like, regardless of whether I want to call you a painter, would you like? Has that term ever like popped up in your mind? Like, is it about like the pleasure of producing images, or is it more of like a technical question? I think that's the question I'm
I
getting at.
think, I mean, I don't think I'd call myself a painter from that, but I definitely take the compliment. But I think there is something to it, and just in terms of that, mm, like just like a lot of it is just this kind of delight in the texture of it, or like the texture of the colors and how that stuff is interacting. And I guess it's like also just trying to, I guess, like trying to understand that, like trying to understand it by making stuff that creates it, trying to understand like that kind of texture and form, and like being interested in exploring that. Like, I guess it's kind of interesting, like building these things, because it's like I'm making them because I don't know how they're going to work. And then I make them and then I'm like exploring in them. And like, I feel like I'm discovering stuff as much as I'm like creating it. Or like, also, like all of these are like kind of techniques that already existed before. Like, I'm not like creating the idea of convolution or anything. It's like, oh yeah, yeah, this is like an existing thing. So it's more like I want to make it and see how it feels, and then you're kind of exploring it. And then like then there's usually a kind of stage a bit later than that where it's kind of like, how do I like package this up so that I can give some of that like sense of exploration to other people, and I've like kind of made the version where it doesn't crash all the time and where it actually does the interesting thing more often than not. So like it exposes the interesting part. So
Yeah.
yeah, I don't know.
On your website under the RGB, like, or in the RGB explanation, it says, what forms do these processes create? What does it look like to wander randomly through this state space? And I feel like wandering randomly looks like Zarina sending like snapshots of what she found and what she got to see. Like, they're the things that she discovered in the exploration, and it's really
Mm.
nice. Your website is also a good example of how art can exist online, um so maybe sometimes better than it can exist in a gallery, because it's on a web page and you can access it any time of night. like like do you worry about how this might translate into exhibition spaces?
I don't know. I mean, like work is designed for that kind of context. And maybe this is like the dirty commercial video games part of me, but like I can't make the thing without thinking about the context and like how people are going to experience it in that kind of, so I'm making these things as web pages and they're like optimized for that. Um, or like Twitter bots are like made to be on Twitter. It's not like, here is this like exciting art and here is like the medium or the delivery format that kind of comes later. Yeah, I don't know. And like the I guess like doing the video games or doing Punch the Custard and stuff like that, like that obviously just doesn't exist online. Like it only exists if you can put your hand in the bucket. So yeah, but like at the same time, it's like the same thing can kind of be adapted, or like you can see that. But like a load of them are like, oh, this is interesting because you get to play around with it for a longer period of time, or because you get to sit with it. There's a piece that I've made but not actually figured out how it can has kind of come out, which spins off some of this epicycle stuff and makes this, basically uses it to make a clock that has like a different pattern and a kind of continuous animation that I guess lasts for that 24 hours. And now I'm kind of like, oh, I mean, it works as a web page, but actually it doesn't make sense as a web page because people are going to come and look at it and they're going to go, oh, that's a nice animation. But like the thing you appreciate is only if it's sitting there for 24 hours, if you're kind of living with it, if you can like catch your eye in that kind of way. And then I'm like, damn it, do I need to like make a clock and sell a physical clock? That sounds like a project I don't want. Or like, is it a screensaver, or exactly what form is it? Or like, how would this actually make sense to kind of show, like even in an exhibition kind of context, you come in, you look at it and you're like, oh, that's kind of interesting, but you only
Yeah,
really appreciate it if you're around it for a while. So
if you're like the
yeah,
invigilator in the room, it would
yeah,
need to
yeah,
be
yeah.
like installed on the outside of a gallery that's interested in creative technology, like, and I can think of many of them. And if you're listening, please get in touch. One of the other questions I had was the work that you make, especially like the HTML pages, feel like enjoyable enough as they are, but do you ever worry that you want people to understand the background, like maths behind it, in order to like unlock further appreciation? Do you want to like tell people how the magic trick is done, or are you fine with them not knowing?
I mean, I don't know. Sometimes I do kind of want to, but I'm less interested in like, starting a YouTube channel where like I explain stuff and like do walkthroughs and kind of deconstruction of that. Like less because I want to like keep the magic trick there, and more just because I don't know, like there's the joy is like exploring it, if that makes sense. Like the joy is like clicking through and like feeling the texture of it and like putting some work into that. Like with RGB, for example, like there's a whole thing of just like as you move your mouse across the screen, like it's not a linear relationship between where you've got your mouse and like the relationship there. It's like, moving it halfway across moves it from like 1 to 10, and then moving it the other half moves it from like 10 to 1,000. Some example like that, and like tuning that curve to make it interesting to explore that is part of it. But at the same time, like I guess from like the kind of nerdy point of view, I do kind of enjoy putting this stuff up, and where I can, where it makes sense to, having it just like, oh yeah, you can, if you're like a programmer, you can view the source and it's like readable and it has some of the like comments and messiness of the making process, and like it would be easy to like minify it and compress it and like tidy that stuff away, but it's kind of nice, it's just like working with the medium, right, of like this kind of web page type thing. It's like, oh yeah, it's a web page, so it's like a text file you download that your browser turns into something else. So
Yeah.
Or I did a piece for a online magazine called Taper, the display case thing that's also linked on my site. And there they have a thing of like, you put your artist statement in the source code of the comments. So if you want to read the artist statement, you have to view source and like view the thing that people have written there.
I like that. I like that.
That's
That's like a special treat for people who, yeah, it is an Easter egg. That's it. Yeah, I like that. The tool explanation is there if you want it, but actually just using it, you can start to think about how it must have been made and figure out like what its capacity is as you experience it. So we know each other from the internet, but also worked together a bit more closely over the past year because V got developing your creative practice funding, which is a strand of funding from the Arts Council in order to figure some shit out. It's time and money, and some people use it for equipment, some people use it to meet people, some people use it to travel as well. If anyone is interested, we have like a million examples of successful funding applications to DYCP on our funding library on thewhitepube.com.
Let me just quickly shout out and say the funding library that was very helpful when I applied, and that also contains my application as I was successful. So if you want to see this conversation in funding language terms, you can do that.
Yeah. What did you get money for? Again, referencing the thing that's behind you that you've still not mentioned for the people who are watching the video version.
So yeah, no, I got money for I guess this kind of strand of work that is this kind of, I guess, generative stuff. So that's kind of the website stuff. And then it's also, I am doing a load of stuff with pen plotter, so like a robot that draws. So building these kind of algorithms to make patterns. And that's kind of interesting, doing pen plotter stuff, because you're limited to this sounds weird to people who like primarily work by doing drawings. Like, you're limited to just like lines. You just get to draw lines on paper. It's very limiting. But yeah, no, I mean, anyway, it's like interesting to break stuff down and to think in terms of like lines or movements rather than like pixels and colors and like fully rendered stuff there. So yeah, it was like to develop that stuff, to develop web page stuff, to buy a new pen plotter because the one I had was annoying, and now I have one that's much less annoying to use and also bigger, so I can do this kind of A3 kind of larger scale stuff. And then also paying for time with you, Gab.
Mentorship. It's funny, like, I
Mentorship.
think like mentorship implies that there's some kind of like hierarchy between people. You know way more about the world than I do. I haven't got a clue. But I was gonna ask Zarina, did you know what a pen plotter was?
I googled it and I still don't know.
Okay. So maybe just like on a practical terms, if Zarina is like the litmus test for the audience, what is a pen plotter? Because it's like a tool that actually I think a lot of artists would be interested in.
Yeah, so basically, I mean, it's a little friendly robot. Like it moves XY, so it can move the arm in 2 dimensions across the surface of the paper, and there's a little motor that moves the pen up and down. And you feed it basically SVGs. So it is this kind of focusing on just like, here is a line, here is a movement. You put clamp a little pen in there, put a piece of paper under it, you set it going, and then you realize, oh, actually I've calibrated it wrong and it's drawing slightly off the paper because it doesn't know where the paper is. So it's really easy to do this. Yeah. So it's like a little robot that you get to draw stuff, which is obviously interesting because you're bringing into, and especially like with the stuff I do where there's a lot of kind of random chance there, you're then bringing in obviously the random chance of the paper and the pen and how those interact and the kind of physical tactility of it. But the pen plots is actually kind of amazing, like especially if you're used to like normal printers. Like it's got a resolution of I think like about 1/10 of a millimeter, so you can draw these kind of really precise things with then maybe pens that are less precise. So there's like a really weird interplay between that kind of precision and that kind of looseness. Yeah, it's also weird just using it like compared to drawing normally, because the pen plotter doesn't put any pressure on it. It's just like the weight of the pen or the pencil that's like holding it down. So drawing with a pencil is really difficult because you need to push harder with a pencil to like get it to make a good mark. So you're often kind of using like a fine liner or something like that is the kind of thing that works well. Oh, it's also kind of interesting just because it like lends itself to this kind of stuff where there's like a ton of fine detail, and so it's just like, oh yeah, a ton of very precise marks that are kind of repeated.
It makes it sound like a really good tool for accessibility as well, for like energy and just like physical capabilities as well. Yeah, the difference between holding a pencil IRL and giving a robot it instead.
Yeah. I guess like the flip side is obviously just the like, because of all of that, like you like lose a load of that like sense of liveness from it. Like is this kind of computer controlled thing.
I don't know if, yeah, I've seen a lot of the drawings that you've generated and I don't think I agree. I mean, like, there is something important that artists have always been interested in terms of like the visibility of their mistakes and keeping like, when people do draw with pencils, they often get a lot of like lead on the side of their hand, and like then the marks might carry across on the paper, and like that happens in paintings as well. Like artists who like use their like pinky finger to lean on the canvas and leave those marks in, and that liveness can be nice, but I don't know, liveliness is definitely in the works still.
Yeah. Well, like I was gonna say, like also like that's partly because like I'm like, I guess like playing with it or like adding that in the like algorithms, or like a lot of these algorithms are based on like a lot of kind of random numbers or kind of simulating that kind of error, and like that feels like a kind of good joke to me, that like I've written an algorithm to simulate like inaccuracies or like doing something slightly wonky, and then I've got like a robot to very precisely draw out that slight wonkiness.
Because it's just like so charming.
Yeah, like it's like, oh yeah, I put some fake wonkiness in there, and like, but where you choose to put the fake wonkiness in, or like where there's like weird precision, or like everything's the same pressure, but there's this like mimicry, like that's never quite
Yeah.
right, of like these kind of human processes. I don't
Is that
know.
like from a self-consciousness that you feel like you should be doing it yourself, or
No, not really. Like I don't think I would draw this stuff myself, or like yeah, it's not from a like, I would do this by hand, but I'm too lazy. It's kind of instead starting from the like, I guess it's starting from like actually the same kind of thing in terms of talking about being a painter or like interested in that texture. I'm like doing it because I'm interested in what those like slips and inaccuracies look like, or like what is the like system behind them, or like trying to like understand them in a systematic kind of way. And then to understand them, you try to like recreate them. And then there's always the kind of joy of it not being quite right, or like, I don't know, it just seems like a
Yeah,
good
yeah.
joke to me.
I mean, it probably goes back to like what you were saying at the beginning of the conversation about like making games that you can't necessarily win. Like
Mm,
if you're making tools, maybe you don't always want the tool to work perfectly like we would assume it would. You make something that is bumpy and human, and see what you can see with it, like in the same generative way. Yeah.
yeah, I mean also like really, I'm some of this I think is just justification for like, no, I think it looks nice, I think it looks interesting. I think like the mark of like a lot of this kind of interesting work is like seeing like really small variations and then like in the larger form. Like for me, that's kind of a thing I really like.
Yeah.
So it's like, yeah, no, I want to make small variations in a repeating larger form.
It's very
Because I think it
successful.
looks nice.
Artists do not say that enough. Oh my god. I wish they did. So much shit just looks good, and that's it.
Yeah, I think that should be enough as well. Like that feels like so much. Yeah, gets post rationalized in a really strange way.
On podcasts and interviews and
You got the truth out of me eventually.
um maybe we should end by talking about Downpour if you wanted to do that.
Yes. So Downpour is I guess Downpour is coming out of this like kind of creative tools things that let other people make things. And it's coming out of the kind of like video game stuff. So it's like, what if people could make video games? Which obviously they can already, but what if people could make video games on their phones without having to either learn to code or like deal with the fact that they can't learn to code? So just a super accessible, super easy thing that you can just use, like built around the fact that phones have a camera in them, so you can just take pictures of things and then link those together. Like it basically the thing it ends up as is like this hypertext thing. So it's just putting in images, putting in text, linking between pages, making that super quick and super simple to use. And then yeah, then you can also just push the button and it uploads to the server that I've got, and you can then share that. You can link it to people. So yeah, I guess that's like the first level. And then the second, like more ambitious thing is like, once you've made this, like, can you then have, I guess, like a platform, a social media platform, which is people making little interactive jokes and like making these little like website nests and like, let me link a thing together and let me like create stuff and like that kind of like handmade kind of aesthetic to stuff, which I think could be really nice.
I'm super excited. I downloaded a build of it yesterday. It's just so easy to use. To be able to like plop little bits in, and I was just saving transparent PNGs off Google Images and just dropping them in, and then looking what was in my camera roll, and it made me like look back at what I actually had, and it felt like, okay, maybe I could use some of this, like maybe it could become material for something creative or just like silly. Like it was really nice. V messaged me yesterday to send an invitation, like a birthday party invitation, but it was made on Downpour, and it was like, again, hypertext going through like um Google Maps so that I could see where your flat was, and it was just getting like more and more zoomed in as I was clicking on. It was just like unnecessarily exciting for a birthday invitation. But it did make me think, like, how do you feel about are you calling it like a game making tool, or is it something broader than that? Or do you think the word game should, broaden itself to meet what you're doing?
I think like the like egotistical way of kind of framing this is like, no, I'm making a new type of thing. But if you say I'm making a new type of thing, then people go, okay, what is that? I don't want this new weird thing. So yeah, no, like, but it does make games. It is a really good tool, I think, for making these kind of little games. And I think game is a really flexible label to put on a lot of different things, especially where they've got kind of choice and interactivity and kind of exploring a space within it. So I guess basically I'm saying, yeah, like it's a tool for making games because games can be anything, but hopefully once people get into it, then I don't know, when people get into it, they might not call the things they're making games, or they might use it for other purposes. Like i think I think like a measure of success for a creative tool is whether people use it to make things that the creator didn't originally intend. Like that for me is the kind of challenge. So like cheatbots did this, like people are using it to make bots that I never would have thought of. So I think similarly, I'm trying to make Downpour, and this is a weird like mindfuck thing to think about, because I'm like trying to make Downpour in such a way that people can make things that I wouldn't think of, but I'm thinking about making it so that people would make things I can't think of, if that
Yeah.
makes sense.
Yeah, and there's just like such a limit. There's a limit to that, and it'll surprise you because people will just run with it once they can get their hands on it. When do you think it will be launched?
I think this summer. I mean, I originally put up a website and it said like late 2022, and then I edited that when that came, and I was like early 2023. And now I'm looking at the website and going, oh, it's not really going to come out early 2023. That's kind of happened already. So
And now you're
I'm
like,
gonna put it to summer.
now you're a game designer again. I was just thinking when you were saying like a game can be anything, I was like, no, it can't. And artwork can be anything. I just don't think we've got like the language for these things. But like,
Yeah.
good. Sometimes that's good.
Well, you're the games critic and the arts critic, so
You're responsible for coming up with them. Yeah, actually, that's a really good point. You should coin a term.
I'll get back to you on that. Okay, thank you to our audience for listening to this lovely conversation. V, where can people find you on the internet if you want to be found? You don't have to tell people.
Yeah. I mean, so I basically go by V21 pretty much everywhere. So my website is v21.io. My Twitter is V21. Instagram is V21, except 21 is spelled out because Instagram won't let you have a short handle.
Yeah.
I know you went through your own tragedy about that.
Yes.
Okay.
I had at GDLP on Instagram for like 2 days and then it's gone. But we won't speak about that because it makes me sad. Thank you again for listening. And yeah, we'll be back with more of these episodes, chatting to interesting people, because again, we have lost our minds. But hopefully it'll be worth it because there'll be a book at some point. Yeah, we'll see you in the next episode of the podcast. Goodbye.
Bye. Thanks so much.
White Cube. White Cube. White